Okay. All right. Let me just take my phone off vibrate because then you'll hear that the whole class every time it's a notification. Okay, welcome everyone. So we have a fun topic for this week. I mean, it's we always try to do fun topics. Welcome Arlene, welcome Lloyd. How you guys doing? Okay. You're welcome to take a sheet if you want. I didn't have time to do translations. You'll forgive me, but you know. It's 7:02, but I was literally just starting. You guys, right in the nick of time. And look at all these seats here in person that are open for you. You can spread yourself out. It's very good. And we're joined with Lloyd and Arlene in person. So it looks like Zadie, Audrey, Jake, Susan, and Arthur on the Zoom, and I'm sure more will join. So as I said, we have a fun topic. You remember the past 2 weeks? Welcome, Dina. Okay, good. We have a Zeman here. Very good. Well, not really a Zeman, 2 men and 2 women, but you know, if we were very progressive, it would be. But anyway, you know, by the way, why men and women don't mix for a Zeman, right?
Why?
You know, the reason it's given is because men and women aren't supposed to be eating together to begin with. That's the argument that some make. I think there was a more left-wing fellow who wrote an article in one of these journals where he kind of goes exhaustively through all the sources on Zeman and makes the argument for why maybe men and women could mix together today. Mind you, it's already welcome Toby. Look at everyone in person here.
We have a female Zeman.
Yeah, but so that's the controversy, which is if you have like what we have here, Lloyd and myself, and then 3 women. Do the 3 women make a Zeman? And it seems, at least halacha in our communities, is that yes, they do.
Our community, we say it does?
I mean, the mono-Orthodox community.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think we're mono-Orthodox, right?
I didn't know what to
If they weren't going to allow men and women to eat together, then there'd be an awful lot of split families.
So it's interesting. I remember when I was when I learned in Eretz Yisrael, so we went to Mea Sharm for Shabbos. And the men were all in the main room and the women were huddled in the kitchen because there was an overflow. And I think like in some very extreme right-wing sects, that's what they do. The normal yeshivish world, men and women are at the table together. They might put like the women on like one end, the men on the other, but like they don't do separate tables.
They don't really.
Yeah, families they don't. Families they don't.
Yes.
I don't know. They had separate rooms at my cousin's wedding, and her great aunt was very upset. She said, "I want to sit with my husband."
Oh, right. Oh, Lloyd.
And then at
Susan?
my cousin Lubavitch wedding, her sister said, "They're splitting my family to make another family."
So it's interesting. There's a good amount of halachic literature on that very question of separate seating at a wedding, and I don't just mean at the chuppah, but I mean at the meal itself. So 3 years ago, I guess,
it was hardly separate.
When I started working as a rabbinic intern at the Young Israel Plainview, it was literally my first Shabbos there was my Shabbos Sheva Brachos, right after Marissa and I got married. So I decided, what would my debut shiur at the shul be on? To be on the topic of mixed seating at weddings, because Marissa's family was, just a average mono-Orthodox family like you would have over here. It wasn't even a hava mina, like a thought to have separate seating. My family, they had to do like the rabbi's table, which was only men. Like it's a rabbi's table, it's only men, but because they don't want to have any women at the table, some people dafka wanted separate seating. For other people from their community, it's like a whole novelty. Like I can actually sit with my wife. And other people are like, I have to sit with my wife. So there's different opinions over here. But there's a good halakhic literature on it. And one of the arguments, I think it's Rev Henkin, who says, it's so silly. We have all these boys and girls who don't get to meet each other. And, we always complain they shouldn't meet each other in a licentious or promiscuous way. Here you have a wedding where people are being married. Chadasu Chedin. This is a holy atmosphere. If there's one place where they should be mixed together and meeting, it should be right over here. I mean, think of all the supervision that's around also. That we need that, but from that point of view,
good thought.
Right. So I forgot it was Rav Hankin or Menachem Rabinovich, which was one of the mono-Orthodox ones. But it's that we'll do that at God willing as a shiur. It's in the files somewhere. I'm happy to bring that out when. I guess if anyone wants me to, if you want me to speak at any wedding, so Sheva Brachos.
For me, it's the quality of the food.
Very good, very good. I have a lot to share about weddings in terms of my preferences, but we actually, so how do we get into this? Because the past 2 weeks we're talking about kiddushin, kiddushin tos, where maybe you get married under false pretenses, and we talked about how to permit someone to save kids from becoming mamzera. Just happens to be, I like to pretend that I planned this all out, but let's call it hashkafa pratis, that God planned it out. What is the not controversial, the controversial? What's the story that everybody skips when they're little kids in this week's parsha? Very good. You look at the sheet, Yehuda and Tamar. So I remember when I was a kid.
It was also early before that, Noah. There were lots of things you
Oh
said.
yeah, there are a lot of things. But like
Sarah's taken.
But the difference, there are things that we sugarcoat or we like gloss. But I remember Yehuda and Tamar, like wholesale, we just skipped. Like I didn't know, you learn about Lot and his daughters. So like we were told, like, oh, they had a baby together or something, but they did it in like very general terms. But here, like they wholesale just skipped the entire thing. So one day I remember when I was in middle school, the Rosh Yeshiva always gave a shmooze on Fridays, which a shmooze is kind of like the Rosh Yeshiva just talks about whatever he wants. Like it somehow connects to the parsha. But imagine like a rabbi sermon, but not organized and going for like 40 minutes. So that's what a shmooze is. So we need things to entertain ourselves. And I wasn't as smart as I've become, thank God, where I know to come with reading material and articles to read. So all I had in front of me was an art scroll stone chumash like you have in the shul. Do you want some cover your hands with a coat or something?
And all of a sudden you're reading.
So I remember I was like, just flipping. I'm like, all right, may as well read about the parsha and get some, So I'm reading through the parsha and I get to the section. You and Tamar like, this is in the chumash? What? Nowadays, I would imagine at a normal Orthodox school, they teach the story at very least, even if they have to gloss
That's how early they teach it.
That's how early.
Yeah.
I guess the argument is that you're not teaching everything anyway. You're kind of like selecting highlights from the parsha, so you can kind of be judicious about which ones you want to share, which ones not. But this gets into that article I shared with you from the Punim Journal. Okay, but anyway, that's the story. So the big there's a number of questions over here. So remember we talked about what's one of the issues if a man and woman are not married? Well, if they're not, remember we asked the question, well, if we want to avoid mamzerim altogether, how about this man and woman, they just live together, but they don't be married? Why is that something that we can't conscious that they wouldn't be married to each other? What's problematic? The problem is as follows. So those who want to follow along inside, the first paragraph. For parsha zu. Okay, so many people, much ink has been spilled over explaining this parsha. So remember a little bit of background about the story. Yehuda's first son gets married to Tamar. Excuse me. Then he dies. Then the second son gets married to her. He dies as well. Yehuda's left with one son left. He's like, there's something wrong with this woman. Okay, I'm not going to let my third son die. And there's actually this. It's called a katlanis, which is a woman who kind of has a track record, like a call her Black Widow, that anyone who she's with dies, so she might have some sort of, she might have something. I should be careful. So
that wasn't quick succession.
What was that? Okay.
Not quick succession.
Yeah. Yes. So the issue. What?
God forbid.
Yes, God forbid. So it's as follows. So this is the issue. It says that a woman should not become a kadesha, which is a prostitute. Very good. But remember we learned how like we translate mamzer as a bastard, but it's not a prop. That doesn't really capture what the term means in halacha. Similarly, over here, a prostitute, a kadesha doesn't really translate well as a prostitute because what's a prostitute? It's a woman who gets money for hire and has sexual relations with people. But you wouldn't think of a boyfriend-girlfriend living together as prostitution. But from a Torah perspective, that's not what a kadesha is. Kadesha is the chol haboel isha below kiddushin, any relationship that takes place outside the context of marriage. Hareza over belav lo sia kadesha. One violates the isser of kadesha. So you hear from Christians all the time about sinning outside the context of marriage, and it's not just a Christian concept, but lo sia kadesha actually is that idea that a man and woman who aren't halachically married, they are violating the Isser of Losia Kedesha each time they are together. So we have a question now. This is our question with this premise. Yehuda al Tamar. How did Yehuda decide to have relations with Tamar? No, I mean, she actually was pretending to be a prostitute, but this violates the Isser of Losia Kedesha. And now you might ask, wait, hold up 1 second. The Torah wasn't yet given. As Tosel points out, so, they try to keep the Torah when they can. So the question is, why would Yehuda, who is this great tzaddik, decide to have relations with Tamar, which was outside the context of marriage? Now, one solution that could be given is that maybe this is a pseudo form of Yibam. There is an argument to make that this is a pseudo form of Yibam. Now, you're going to ask me, well, first, let me tell you what Yibam is, and I'll tell you why it's a bit of a difficult claim to swallow. Yibam is when a man passes away and leaves a wife in the world, they didn't have any children. There's a mitzvah for his brother to take his place and to have a child with his former wife. Now, the issue here is that Yehuda is the father. He's not the brother of the deceased. So he wouldn't have a mitzvah of Yibam. But some try to make that claim that it was a form of Yibam. And in fact, because maybe it was legitimized that way, who comes from this union ultimately? Which great figure in Tanakh? David HaMelech, very good. So it's hard to believe that the great David HaMelech will come from a relationship that was fully made in sin. So
plus the son he wanted to protect was still alive, right?
Yes, Sheila. I forgot how to pronounce the exact pronunciation of it, but I think that's his name. Sheila. Yeah. So like he's alive, yes.
So where is he? Where when all this is going on?
So what happens basically? Oh, I guess he's in Cheder. Learn. I don't know. You kind of have to figure out where he is. He's in school, but he's like basically a young kid. It's Tamar thinks that, okay, I'm going to wait till he comes of age and then I'll marry him. But then she realizes when he comes of age and nothing's happening, he's not being offered to her. She gets the message and it takes matters into her own hands.
Did he not think that she was Jewish?
Oh, very good, very good. So Dina's like, maybe she was not Jewish. So listen to this. I guess next time I'll try to print it out with the translation, but I'll translate for you. Second paragraph. Listen to this fascinating conversation. Do you ever wonder how the conversation went? Like you pay for services and then that's it. The Gemara and Sota, the rabbis, fill in the details.
How did they know?
That's always the question. So the easiest answer for it, there's two answers. Either the rabbis had a tradition, or alternatively, it's what I'll call in, I apologize, irreverent terms, as a conservative rabbi once put it to me, the rabbi's fan fiction on Tanakh. But it's a fan fiction, but unlike fan fiction, which of course is just like you make up whatever you want, the rabbis understood that they were filling in the blanks that God deliberately left so that they could convey a Torah value through that lesson. That's usually the easiest way to understand Medrash, because Medrash makes all sorts, if you take it literally, Medrash makes all sorts of fantastic claims that are very difficult for one to swallow, especially those of us who are more of the rationalist inclination. So that's how I would understand it. But what did Rabbi Stone? Listen to this conversation. Second paragraph. Indeed, this is what happened to Yehuda Shalas Tamar. Yehuda, before he hired her, Yehuda asked her a few questions. He really didn't want to do this, actually. He was trying to find a reason to tell himself that it was usser. And in fact, he made sure, he interrogated her to ensure that it was mutter for him to have relations with her. How so? He asked, Shemer Nachrasat, maybe you're not Jewish, whatever not Jewish really means back then. She says, no, I'm a convert, I'm fully Jewish. Chazar Yehuda V'shal, Yehuda tries another question. Maybe I can't have relations with her. Why? Maybe you're a married woman. Amarle, no. Penuyani, no, I'm not married, I'm available. Chazar V'shal, Yehuda tries a third time, another question. Shema Kilo Bach Avich Kiddushin. maybe your father accepted kiddushin on your behalf a long time ago, and you don't, perhaps you're married to someone that you never got divorced from. You have to say it that way because a woman, when she becomes a bogeres after 12 and a half years old, her father no longer has any jurisdiction over her. So that's how you have to understand it. Amrle, no, Yisomani, I never had and my father died, what?
I'm an orphan.
Yeah, I'm an orphan. So I never really, I guess, had a father, but didn't have functionally a father. So he says, Shema Tzmea at Nida, maybe you're a Nida, and I'll have relations with you. Amrle Tahora, and she said, no, I went to mikvah and I am Tahora, which, by the way, just a quick parenthetical, I think this was like a movement in the, I only know from what I hear, I never looked at the Upper West Side, but basically a lot of singles who are more sexually frustrated, so they want to find ways to have intimacy, but without outright breaking halacha. So the idea they came up with was, they call it a tefillin date. That's the term. That the reason it's called a tefillin date is because the girl goes to mikvah, and then the guy comes over, they do what they do together, and then he's there the next morning and puts on tefillin for Shabbos. So that's why it's called a tefillin date. This is
Why is that legit? Why is that okay?
So it's right. So they think it's okay. Why? Because she went to mikvah, so there's no Isser Nida, right? But what they forgot apparently was the Isser of Losia Kadesha, which people don't think about as much, that there's an Isser, the Rambam writes, to have relations outside the context of marriage. So
how can they go to the mikveh if they're not married? I mean,
because the mikvah, some mikvahs don't ask questions. I mean, I don't know how ours operates. I don't think they have someone at the door who like IDs people. Show me your wedding ring.
You have to make an appointment. So
Well, before you get married, you go to the mikvah.
You do. But then throughout marriage also is ideally what's supposed to be happening. So obviously postmenopausal, you don't. Anyway.
What's odd is it seems as though halacha is struggling, and this is such a not known concept in halacha, and yet in the secular society, talking about having sexual relations out of wedlock was always a no-no.
That's the term I was looking for, wedlock. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that was like common. I mean, maybe not so much today anymore, but certainly when I was growing up, I was like, oh no, you don't do that. And it didn't even have a religious connotation necessarily. It was just
society. So Toby said, like, society knew back in the day. We never have to talk about the Israel Kadesha because society knew back then that you're not intimate with someone who you're not married to. Society just knew that. And remember when we went through that Shula of Rav Asher Weiss last week? He said, we're like Sodom and Amorah. That now, because remember, he was asking that question that, well, isn't there a chazaka that ein adam osa bilas nos, that when two people have relations together, they intend for marital purposes? He says that chazaka is out the window because, haraya, we see right in front of us that people dafka live together as boyfriend and girlfriend, specifically not getting married. That's like a stage in the relationship. So yeah, it's that's maybe why it's the Isser Losia Kadesha, Torah points out, has never been on our collective
So do you see
radar.
this? I mean, sociologically, do we see this in the Orthodox world now that then the unmarried men and women live together?
Oh, I mean, I can't say I've like witnessed with my own two eyes, but you see it a lot.
In the Orthodox world?
Yeah.
it's
I know. I mean, Marissa had. You see, I grew up in the Yeshivish world, but Marissa, who grew up in the non-Orthodox world, she like named me a lot of people who does.
You don't have to name them for us.
No. It's one that came to mind. So I'm not gonna mention any names. But no, this is something that happens. In fact, who's a good article to read if you want to read about it? My Rebbe, Rabbi Ezra Schwartz, who was the previous rabbi of Mount Sinai, Washington Heights. That is a singles shul. So he did a very smart thing. He waited until he finished his job there, and then he published his article in Tablet about his experiences of being a rabbi in a single shul. He clearly had that article ready to go, but like was waiting till he was out of there. And I remember it was Nida with him, and he would actually share with us the struggles that he saw and how he tried to counsel people with like no easy answer to someone who's over 30 years old and is still trying to find someone. I mean, you look in Pirkei Avos, Chazal thought we were married when we were teenagers, so it's they probably understood the human condition to a certain degree. Excuse me. Anyway, but yes, this is very much happy. Go watch nights. You go to the Upper West Side. This is Maisa B'Chol. It happens. Okay. So with that in mind, you see that Yehuda was actually making sure, like he did all the drishos v'chakiros. He interrogated her to make sure that you're not a non-Jew, you're not a nida, you're not married. And after he went through his entire checklist, he's like, oh, okay, kosher, let's do this. But however, for Amar Akach Haram Keich of Keich over Yehuda Alav Dikacha. So the question is, why, if he was worried about all these other possible violations of the Torah, why wasn't he worried about the Isser of Lo Siyah Kadesha, of, again, for lack of a better term, prostitution, but really relations out of wedlock? So the Maharsha, so the answer is that Yehuda actually was Makadesher with money and with a document, with kesem and shtar, which are two modes that we marry someone with. You think about under the chuppah, when you give the ring, that's kesef, that's money. And some say when you hand the ksuba over, the groom hands the ksuba over to the bride, that is giving a shtar to effectuate kiddushin. Excuse me. So the Maharsha and Sota on the spot there writes, Heiral dvar shei hare Yehuda amar l're'ehu hadulami shetamar tikach la esa irvo penia lavuz. So number one, we have two questions over here. One will resolve, one we won't resolve so well, I think. One is, if he actually did marry her, and he, she wasn't an Ida, she wasn't a guy, etc., etc. This is all kosher, glot kosher, mahadrin and mahadrin. So why does Yehuda feel this busha? Why is it clear from the psukim that he has a shame in what he did? What he did was completely legitimate, according to this. That's question number one.
Father-in-law.
What?
Jane was abandoning his wife. I mean, if he married her.
Well, you could have
Then how do you
multiple
just-
wives.
Oh, we don't know about it.
You could have multiple wives.
That is
Right,
true.
But she was essentially abandoned.
Do we know if she's still alive? So they're asking about, well, Yehuda should feel ashamed about just getting his second wife or leaving his wife for Tamar. I don't know if we know anything about Yehuda, right? Because presumably he had a wife. That's how he had children, right? But we don't. As far as I know, I don't think we even hear about it. So, which, by the way, that's a great question. Like, look who's missing from the story over here, Mrs. Yehuda. What happened to Mrs. Yehuda? So that's I would say her name. I just don't know her name. That's the issue.
Wasn't there more than one? I don't know.
Right. So that's what right. And Dina pointed out, you can have multiple wives.
I think the Bush is like his father-in-law.
You're saying so Dina suggests the Bushes, you should feel bad because you're the father-in-law still.
Aren't you not supposed to legalot ervat?
Right, Avicha.
Yeah.
But it's
Banecha.
interesting. This is the opposite because it's
There must be something in the list.
Yeah.
You say, let's go down Achremos. You'll find something and you'll throw in a few sets of Malchus while we're at it. Okay, so and the second question is Od Hikshashari Maisis Ahoya below Adim. Wait a minute. Remember we spent the whole last 2 weeks ago. We talked about what's one of the reasons the Kiddushin might not be valid, because a conservative rabbi and all the people there aren't kosher witnesses. Remember, an indispensable component of effectuating a Kiddushin is having two valid witnesses. Yehuda goes to Tamar and secretly, you could argue they were in the crossroads, actually. There could have been two witnesses walking by, possibly. But there were no two witnesses that witnessed this Kiddushin, as far as we know. So how can we accept that this was a Kiddushin? And if there isn't a valid Kiddushin here, then we run back to the same issue. Yehuda, who was so careful about making sure she was a Jew, making sure she wasn't married, making sure she wasn't a Nida, somehow he forgot about this law of Lo Siyah Kadesha, of not having relations outside the context of marriage. So that's the question. Where are the Edom over here? Any suggestions? What do we do?
Maybe he was kind of pushed into it. It wasn't his desire to do it. It was Dina's desire.
It was whose?
Tamar's desire.
Tamar's desire.
Tamar's.
But you see that I'm gonna get very liberal on you right now. You're gonna blame this on Tamar? You're saying Yehuda had no agency? You're saying this is all the woman's fault?
In this particular case, maybe maybe she knew what the future was supposed to be.
Okay, very good. So there is a discussion about that. You want to hear something even more wild, by the way. There is a medrash. I saw it quoted in the Sivos Shalom, which is a Hasidic sefer. And basically, because this is question, like this bothers a lot of people, by the way. How could the Heilige Yehuda, the great Tzaddik Yehuda, hire a prostitute? Like, even if you say maybe like possibly this mutter and so great Yehuda Tzaddik could do that. Like this is where the Malchus based David comes from. This is where the line of Jewish kings come from. This is where Mashiach comes from. So
He was very distraught at this point, right?
he was right. He was very distraught. It's after the whole Yosef case. He's fallen from grace. True. But still, but the Hasidim especially, especially like though, us modern Orthodox people were fine being somewhat critical of characters in the Torah. But if they come from like a Hasidic, very traditional perspective, Hasidic and traditional doesn't always go together, really, because that's a recent movement. But you know what I mean? That like the Avos were perfect, pristine. They're like not even human beings; they were angels. So how can Yehuda sin? So you know what they suggest based on a medrash. I need to track it down. That actually, God needed Yehuda and Tamar to produce a child, and so Yehuda, for lack of a better term, was possessed by a divine will, which forced him to have relations with Tamar, and it was not his own free choice. He was, like you talk about a lack of free will. This is literally, how we have questions maybe about Paro, his heart was hardened, and we try to find ways to argue like his heart wasn't really hardened. God just put him in a scenario where he would be set to fail. We come up with different ideas. This marriage outright literally says Yehuda's body was hijacked and was forced to do what he needed to do.
I mean, there are lots of examples in Tanakh about good things coming out of illicit relationships, like David and Bathsheba. And you got Solomon. I mean, there's no way that anyone can say that,
Right.
That was an appropriate relationship at the time it happened. But I guess the ultimate result, justified whatever was done. So why don't they just say that here?
Or maybe we're just our heroes aren't as perfect as we're. We're supposed to
Exactly.
be.
Right. So I'll just repeat for the folks on the phone. So what Toby's pointing out is like, why do we have to fetch in this shot, right? Why do we have to give such a far-fetched answer that he was possessed? And I agree with you. I think it's far-fetched. That's why it's what Rav Sobolovsky, who will be our scholar in residence for Yom Ian, he calls these ideas like things that you don't really use in practice or preach from the pulpit per se, but he calls them collector's items. These are like good Makoros like to know. They're just like interesting fun facts that you drop in a shear. So the point that Toby was making, and then Sadie, I'll take your point, is that what do you mean? We see with David and Bathsheba, that was an illicit relationship. Okay, maybe technically it wasn't adultery because her husband was already dead on the front lines, but clearly it was done through an unethical means. I would say, though, the difference here is that we don't see Yehuda getting punished. There's no indication he's punished for having this relationship with Tamar, versus David HaMelech actually gets rebuked, and he actually admits his sin, and arguably the whole rebellion of Avshalom, it possibly is due to that sin that he committed. So here we don't see indication.
Indicative that it wasn't nothing wrong with it.
Exactly, and that's what would make it. I mean, it's hard. Like it's an absence. We're trying to prove something from an absence of something something not happening.
No, you
But-
can't see that they were married because doesn't he actually marry her later?
At the end of
Yeah,
the story,
so-
they are together. But this is beforehand.
No, but I'm saying before you got to this possession one, there was the theory that maybe they were actually married.
Right.
And I'm saying, how could that hold up if he then marries her later?
But is the wording that they get married later? What's the wording? I don't think there's like a wording that says then they got married and lived happily ever afterwards. But I have to look back. I have to catch up on my Shnai Mikra. Zadie.
The Torah, I think, goes out of its way to show us the weaknesses and the blemishes in the Avos. Matter of fact, if you want to use the term heroes in the Torah, and his blemish is being shown. It's a teaching point. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's expected to be perfect. And it's also showing the righteousness of Tamar because she was solving a situation that was handed to her.
Right. She took initiative when things she saw nothing was happening, and then she stood up and made things happen. Yeah, let's see them teach that at Beis Yaakov. But Zadie, I think the point you're making is actually works well. What Toby was pointing out, that Yehuda was in a slump right now, and this really shows the vulnerability of even the greatest characters in Tanakh. And ultimately, from this, he rose and became the Yehuda that he was. In fact, that's the point that many make of why ultimately did the line of kings come from Yehuda and not from, let's say, Yosef, who was the viceroy. It's because Yehuda showed us that Yosef, he remained pure the entire time. When temptation came with the wife of Potiphar, he said no. But Yehuda is like the Baal Tshuva. He actually did sin. He went down, but then he came back up. And those are the kind of leaders and models we need sometimes, not just those who were like the Gedolim and like the art scroll biographies who were perfect their entire lives, but the people like who had imperfections and then were able to overcome it. Now, you don't want to go the opposite extreme. Sometimes you have like that youth advisor guy who's like, yeah, I smoked every single drug in the book. I can name more than he smoked. And like we don't need to hear like everything in your past. Some people think like I'm so relatable because I shared every single stupid thing I ever did. My time at NC's what can I tell you? Like that's what you hear sometimes. It's all you hear. Okay, we have a little bit of material to cover, so if we just hold questions for another 5 minutes, I just want to resolve this and then take any additional ideas that you have. So again, the way we're solving the issue of Losia Kadesha, let's just bring it in. The issue we had is Yehuda wants to do everything in a kosher fashion. He asked her a million questions. Are you a Jew? Are you not a Nida? Are you not married? But he didn't seem to care about being married to her, which leads some Rishon Achron to suggest that no, in fact, they actually were married. He married her through money, through documents, Kesef Ishtar. But the question is, how did he effectuate the Kiddushin without witnesses? So where were the witnesses? So the answer, interestingly, this is a whole separate sugya, but I'll give you one answer. The Rush writes, this is on the bottom of the column, going to the next one. The Shtar Kiddushin shekasu habal b'ksavi yado kosher af below ede chasima below ede mesira. So whole big sugya Kiddushin about do you need witnesses to sign on a document or just witnesses when you hand over the document? Leave that to the side. Basically, there's a principle in halacha called Hudas Bal Din Kameya Edim Dami, that my admission in court is the equivalent of 100 witnesses. What does that mean? 100 witnesses equal to 2 witnesses in halacha. What it's saying is you're not going to get a better proof. Let's say we're in a financial case and 2 witnesses claim I owe $200. If I admit I owe $200, there's nothing better than me myself actually admitting I owe the $200. So it's a similar idea over here, that maybe if I myself am the one who writes the document for the Kiddushin and sign my name on there, I don't need 2 witnesses because it's my own admission on here that I am obligating myself to this woman. So what could be better than that? So perhaps you'd have to say that Yehuda wrote up like a whole ksuba on the spot and gave it to her. Again, this is probably not exactly how it went down, but that's this sefer goes into what we call halachic, I call halachic acrobatics. Fun limits on the parsha. But this is to bring me to another point. You flip over your page, a point over here. So a question is, a lot of Rishonim don't accept that. A lot of Rishonim accept it when it comes to Gittin, but not to Kiddushin. So we need another resolution. Another resolution is that, look, Tamar isn't Jewish. In fact, there's no Torah around at this point. Remember, sometimes we act as if the Torah is on, sometimes we don't. We're kind of oscillating between them. But the idea is that there's no Torah around right now. And by the way, if you look in the pasuk, I put quotation marks there so you can see it, and I underlined a little bit. So the next side of the page, the second box, you'll see what I see, like the second box. Yeah, that one on the right bottom box. So Ukesef, Ukesef a Kesef Mishnah al Ramach, the Kushiyasa lo kasha mini. Shemefurish b'Torah, Lucia Kadesha mibnos Yisrael. It says, who's not allowed to be Kadesha? Someone from Benos Yisrael. There's no Yisrael yet. There's no Benos Yisrael. There's no Jew, that means Jewish women. Wow, that's a really great resolution. The Grizz in the next paragraph points out. Anyone know who the Grizz was? It's not a bear. It's not a grizzly bear. The Grizz was Rav Soloveitchik. So you had Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. So he had a son, Reb Velvel, who was the Grizz, and then he had another son, Reb Moshe, whose son was Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Joseph B. Soloveitchik from YU.
Yosef was the son of Moshe. So they took this.
Yosef Dov is from Moshe. So basically, the Grizz is the Rav's uncle. Very good. And there's actually, I think, a few correspondences between them that we have on record. So it's talking in Torah. It's very nice. So the Grizz, I mean, this is like a name, just good to know in general, like Yeshiva world, like you put a Grizz on a sheet, like, you know, that carries a lot of weight. So the Grizz writes, Uvar b'tamam am kol isur shel kedusha machas mat mechasra kedushin. Bovent kol hachem bilsa shaykh rak mishin nitfas bo chefsa shel ishus Yisrael. The isur of losia kedusha, of not having relations outside the context of marriage, can only be operative when there is an option to have a Jewish marriage. But if there's no option to have a Jewish marriage at this point in history, then the Isser of Losia Kadesha is moot. It doesn't have any application because the Isser is do not have relations outside the context of marriage. But that's only forbidden when there's an option to have a Jewish marriage. If you can't be married, then this Isser is inoperative. Achein, and therefore he says, "V'nachers u'shivcha she'ein kiddushin tosvahen ein shayach hach Isser Kadesha." Therefore, when it comes to a non-Jewish woman, for her, since she doesn't have the option of Kiddushin, therefore there's no Isser of Losia Kadesha of her being a Kadesha. Ukmoshavir Grizz, Matakoda Matan Torah ain't Isser Kadesha, Asher the Chosmanch ain't Ishus Yisrael ain't Mitfas Ko Iker Kalo Shem Kadesha. That's what he says. Now, final paragraph, and then he puts it all together. He quotes the Mor Nevuchim. Now, the Mor Nevuchim, the guy from Perplex, that's the Rambam. The Mor Nevuchim does not usually get cited in this sefer, by the way, because this is a halachic sefer. So he doesn't always quote from philosophical texts. But listen to that. I never saw this point in the Mor Nevuchim before. I can't say I didn't go through the Mor Nevuchim as a whole book, but I've seen a lot of key passages from there. And I never saw this one. Listen to this. This is fascinating. Very, very, it's almost like progressive in a certain way. Rambam writes that one's relations with a Kedesha before the giving of the Torah is tantamount, it's equivalent to the relationship that a man has with his wife after the Torah was given and applicable. Klomar, what does that mean? The same way we legitimize relationships through marriage after the Torah is given, a man and woman getting together before marriage without Kiddushin was also acceptable. Just acceptable as two people being married today. And listen to this line. This is the kicker where I double underlined it. Umatan haskar hamuskam alav lekidesha oz kematan tsubas isha la ata bisman hagershin. The money that's given to a woman, to a prostitute before Matan Torah, is basically the equivalent of what a man has to give to a woman when he divorces her for her services. You guys catch that?
Don't get that exactly.
So basically what he's saying, this is like a crazy notion, by the way. Forgive me, Rambam, for saying this, but the Mor Nevuchim is full of things like this. Basically, the money that a person gives to a prostitute is to reimburse her for her. It's what?
No wonder he was perplexed.
No wonder he was perplexed.
For what?
I'll just explain why this is perplexing. Not everyone caught on to that. So the reason this is perplexing, very good, Toby, is because he says that the money given to compensate the prostitute for her times before Kiddushin is equivalent to the money that a man, if he chooses to divorce his wife, must give her at the end of the marriage to compensate her for her services, like the prostitutes. Because this is an obligation he has that's incumbent upon him to reimburse her for her time. So maybe there's more to this. He's taking a line out of context here. Maybe it would sound different if we read it in the broader context in the more Nebuchadnezzar, possibly.
It makes sense.
Ah,
It's like.
you just said it was perplexing. Now you said it makes sense.
But I'm thinking the concept is that there's got to be payment for services at some point. Before Matan Torah, it was like you paid in advance, and after Matan Torah, you paid at the end. But
Right.
there's payment.
Right.
It's
Oh no, it works
Yeah.
really. It works.
Yeah.
Yes, conceptually, so Toy points out. Yes, conceptually, it makes sense. Meaning, yes, you are giving money for something that was provided to you. It's a trade in that respect. But the part that's unsettling is that it puts the marriage in very transactional terms, which again, you learn. Yeah, look, you learn Masechtas Kiddushin. It's full of transactional terms. But even I'll just say for myself, even after learning Kiddushin B'Iyan more than once, I was still thrown off by this line over here because Rambam. What happens? A lot of the Rishonim, what they'll do is that they might explain that even though it's in transactional terms, it's not really a monetary transaction, right? We try to smooth things over. But here Rambam is just like plows into that. He digs deeper into that idea. He's like, yes, it's a transaction. Your wife is basically a prostitute and you're compensating her for her time. That's what it sounds like, what he's writing over there. That's what's, again, admittedly, I did not look up the reference over here. I only have his quote. Maybe there's more to what the Rambam is writing. I freely admit that I haven't looked up the full context of this Rambam.
It
But anyway,
couldn't have been a marriage because there was no intent on the part of either one of them to be married. It was just purchasing her services for one experience. And he agreed to pay a certain price for it in advance. And then he sent somebody back with the payment and he couldn't find Tamar.
Right. But the crazy part is comparing a marriage to prostitution, which, by the way, I think some people who are of like the more radical feminist ideology, like that's actually what they argue, is that marriage is slavery and it's likened to prostitution. So I guess Rambam, who's, by the way, the same Rambam who says a woman shouldn't leave her house more than like once or twice a month, is the same Rambam who it's like the horseshoe theory. If you go too far to either extreme, you wind up saying the same thing. It's like, how the it's like anti-Semitism. You go too far to right or left, you wind up both hating the Jews. So it's almost like you go too far to either extreme, you wind up saying the same thing eventually. So Klomar, she says, "Isha shemuta lev l'shama akan dvarav." He named a furish b'divrei harambam shel hayashum tiyuv kaba ma'aseh Yehuda. Therefore, everything was okay with Yehuda. The answer is, you know what? Look, we're throwing out the idea. Yehuda didn't all of a sudden write a ksuba on the spot. We don't have to get into the question of the Edom. Yehuda didn't need to marry her. And you don't have to worry about marriage happening later, Toby. They didn't have to get married because before Matan Torah, it was okay. Now, the issue that this leaves me with is this only resolves one question. This resolves how it was mutter for them to have relations with each other, but it doesn't resolve the first question we had, which is, if so, why is Yehuda ashamed? Why is he busha? We just took pains to explain how it was 100% permissible what he did, that what they did together. And that, but
I think it was with any other woman, it would have explained it perfectly. The fact that she was his daughter-in-law. Was
right.
the busha.
Right, so you're saying that's his daughter-in-law. So Afal Pikain, even if you find a way to make it mutter, it's what we call manuvel b'rishus haTorah, that it's still something that would be abominable. And something that shouldn't be done. So when he realized afterwards what happened, that's why he maybe had the busha. But the question is, did he realize at that time? He seems to have busha before realizing that it was his daughter-in-law. So it might need another explanation. I would agree, but it seems chronologically that he had busha, he had shame before finding that out. So that's the question.
But when he said that she is more righteous than me, it's an acknowledgement that she was fulfilling the obligation to have a child from the family. If she couldn't get it from the youngest son, she was going to have the child by the son's father, and he was just looking for a commercial transaction to relieve his sexual tensions. And so she was more righteous than him in his estimate.
She had loftier goals, whereas he did not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, just a reminder, where did we see this story happen recently in one of our shiurim that we had, other than our Monday night class that we just had? Where did this come up recently?
It must have been Thursday.
Very good. Good. Yes, in our Mako shir, remember we talked about there were 3 instances where God showed up to a court case, where God made a baskol come out from heaven. So we asked in our Mako's class, Chaf Gimel Amid Beis, we're almost at the end. So the question is, how did Yehuda know that she was pregnant from him? If she was a prostitute, presumably there were other men as well. So therefore, God had to intervene and tell everyone, or tell him, that indeed it was from him. And that's when he responds as, she's correct. She's more righteous than me.
But he was also told that she wasn't a prostitute.
That she, right, and yeah.
Yes, so she knew he knew that she was not a prostitute at the,
Well,
and
well, I guess he pieced it together, and for all he knows,
no,
she
it
was-
says in the Torah that they told him that the
Right.
woman wasn't there. They went to look for her and she wasn't there.
she could have set
and-
up shop somewhere else. Yeah, I mean, it's like you sell
It meant-
drugs in one place, you find it in a different place the next time.
Well,
But okay, no, that maybe we could deduce something from there, Phyllis. Very good. All right. I hope we enjoyed our topic. I'll try to get translations next time. But
And Moshe,
hope
give me a
that's been
call.
used. And Zadie, I'll give you a call in 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
great.
Take care and have a wonderful
Thank you.
Shabbos.
thank you very much. You too. Good. Happy
Well, I'm saying good Shabbos because I'm not. This is my last year for the week.
Thanksgiving.
Okay. All right. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good vacation.